It's me. I'm back, and as you can see, we've been consigned to YouTube once again, for better or for worse, probably for worse. But this is a temporary expedient. Let us hope, anyways, that it'll be a temporary expedient. What you should know by now, because if you are listening to this, then you would have received my email, and if you received my email, then chances are you probably read my email, and if you read my email, then you will be aware of the fact that the reason we are consigned to this particular modality of instruction is on account of the fact that the college, out of an abundance of caution and out of consideration for your well-being as well as mine, decided that it would be advantageous and strategically calculated to make the decision to go ahead and temporarily suspend academic operations on site. That was a decision that was made in consultation with the community health people from the Houghton County Health Committee or Commission. And it was a decision that was, again, done so out of an abundance of caution so as to try to mitigate and reduce the proliferation of COVID, which, as you should be well aware, is continuing to go up at a very exponential rate. We talked about exponentiation or exponential increases a couple of weeks ago when I talked about the epidemiology of COVID, so I hope you remember that, and I think you probably do because I think all of you were there for that lecture. But suffice it to say, it is an ongoing issue, and I don't think that this is going to go away anytime soon. Unless, of course, we all take this very seriously and we make a very concerted and proactive approach to preempt the possibility of the continued proliferation. Now, that's going to require effort on all of our parts, not just mine, but also yours. And so it's incumbent upon you to do the socially responsible thing, the civically conscientious thing, and not just out of consideration for yourself, but out of consideration for those around you as well. Now, before I delve into the substance of what is ultimately going to be today's lecture, and let me just keep track of time, guys, because I don't want to take too much of your time. I know you guys got other things going on. You got places to be, things to do, people to see, as do I. And as you can see from my arrangements here, I've got my Steam session open up here. I'm going to delve back into some Battlefield 2, possibly some Total War later on, perhaps even some Skyrim if I can get it working on Windows 10. And so I don't want you guys to be cutting in too substantially into my gaming time, and likewise, this is a two-way street. I'm not going to cut too substantially into your Netflix watching time, whatever you have on the agenda for this Wednesday night. So we're starting at 7 o'clock. This is 7 o'clock, and by the way, it is Wednesday. Today is the 23rd of September. Not that that really matters, but there you go. A couple of perfunctory issues. First of all, you will notice that the setting here is my production values have diminished substantially since the last time I recorded one of these YouTube videos. You can probably discern from the background that the backdrop has a political context to it. Maybe, I guess it depends on what symbolism you ascribe to these particular banners. This is actually my room, as luck would have. This is my bedroom. This is where the magic happens, as I like to say. The magic of instruction and edification and enlightenment, of course, is what I'm referring to. The flag's behind me. Before any of you go run off onto Twitter or wherever, whatever social network happens to be your particular social network of choice, and to attempt to insinuate that I was doing something that crossed the boundaries of propriety in academia. These are both Crusader flags. They're historical flags. I'm a historian. I teach history in addition to political science, and hence I have a affinity for history. And I try to commemorate it and remember it because it's something that I live and breathe and embrace on a daily basis. So the flags are neither here nor there, but for those who are curious and those who are interested, these are flags that are associated with the Crusader period, so the Christian Crusades, and indeed the Islamic counter-crusades in the Middle Ages. But they're really irrelevant to our conversation, but I think they provide a very nice backdrop, and that's why I actually left them on here, because otherwise I'm going to take these flags down. I'm going to see this black sort of shawl. It's a window darkening sheet that I bought from Walmart, of all places. And it's meant to obstruct the passage of light through my window because I tend to sleep in rather late, and otherwise the light comes in here and wakes me up. So this enhances the aesthetics, and it adds some character to the venue here. So hopefully you appreciate that. If I don't add enough character on my own, which is to say that I probably do, because I'm quite the character, which you already know. Okay, first things first. So I don't want this temporary delay or suspension, and I'm hoping very fervently, and you should all be hoping as well for the sake of all of our interests, that this is in fact just a temporary solution. It's a temporary expedient. It's meant to mitigate the spread of COVID, which is, as I said, proliferating at a very exponential rate locally. Whether or not it actually has a tangible effect on that, I don't know. Conceivably it could, and therefore if it could, we should probably do this because it's in everybody's best interest to do that. Whether we actually come back on Tuesday, I'm hopeful that we will. I suspect that we may not, but only time will tell. So let's hope and expect. Let's hope for the best, expect for the worst, and be ready for anything, as I like to say. But let's plan on reconvening on Tuesday, okay? And when we reconvene on Tuesday, and I refer you to the email that I sent out because that will give you some insights into this, and I clarified that much more extensively in that email than I'm prepared to do right now. But the email essentially said that we should plan on continuing to pursue the objective, which is to take our verbal evaluation format exam. And if you're in any way ambiguous about the nature of that test and what it's actually going to entail in terms of the substance, the format, the formatting, and what it's going to be like, then I would refer you to the email that I sent out before the last email that you received, which I think I sent out yesterday, which would have been Tuesday. So check your email. This is very important. It's incumbent upon you to stay up with these things. If you check the last email, right, the 2 emails ago, you will see that I essentially adumbrated, I listed in very succinct and very comprehensive form the conditions which we all agreed on, which would determine precisely what the actual first test was going to be looking like, right? And so I gave several concessions, I made several stipulations, several caveats, and I basically said that this is going to be an interview. It's going to be a verbal interview. You're going to sit down vis-a-vis me, directly opposite me, and we're going to have a conversation. And that conversation is going to be inclusive of as many questions as is necessary, okay? And if you really think about this, what did I stipulate in that email? Go back and read it if you're not acquainted with it, because I'm going to be referring to it right now when I talk. So what I said in that email is that you're going to be responsible for answering 3 questions, okay? Essentially 3 questions, right? I'm going to ask a total of 9 questions, okay? And you are allowed to take a pass on a total of 6 of those questions, right? So you could theoretically, conceivably, answer the first 3 questions, and you're right off the bat, and you're out of the gate, and you're done, right? Or you could say, you know what, I don't like question number 1, and I don't like question number 2, and I don't like question number 3, and so on and so forth until you get to question number 6, at which point you're going to have to answer the next the questions after that, 7, 8, and 9, right? So at that point, you'll leave yourself with no other option because that's your fallback point. You're defending the last trench, and those are the questions you have to ask at that point. So it's process of elimination. Or what you could do, instead of saying, oh, I'm going to leave this up to chance and fate and just hope that I'm ready for one of the questions that he asked me. Well, again, they're going to be 9 questions. Actually, no, you can't do this because there's 12 questions total, okay, on the study guide. The last time I checked, and that was about 5 minutes ago, and I don't think it's changed any time since then, but the last time I checked, there was 12 questions total. And by the way, for those of you who don't have this document in front of you, I strongly recommend that you pause this video right now, go out there, print it off, or bring it up on your monitor if you have a dual monitor. I don't know how you do it, split screen, I guess, and just listen to me if you want to, or if you want to see what I'm doing, you can have the video feed in there as well. There are 12 questions on this, okay? 12 questions on the study guide, which means that I'm going to ask you, as I said, I'm going to ask you 6 of the 12, right? I'm sorry, three. I got to get these numbers right. I'm sorry, guys. All right. I am going to ask you a total of 9 questions, okay? You will be responsible for answering 3 out of those 9. The 3 that you are most comfortable with, the 3 that you feel most confident in answering, all right? And so I would recommend that you know all of this stuff. Originally I was going to say my advice to you guys, which is going to be sort of lazy advice that I would give you from one former slacker to another slacker, was going to be say, well, just memorize 3 questions and just come in there and say these are the 3 that I want to answer because that would assume that there's only 9 questions on the actual study guide. 3 for 9. I only ask 9 questions, or 9 questions total. You can just take 3 and go with it, right? But actually, the way it's set up is you're going to have to know some of the, you're going to have to be pretty conversant with all these questions, and that's actually a good thing because I want you guys to know this stuff. It's important to know this stuff. This stuff wouldn't be on the study guide, but for the fact that it's important. All right, I don't put superfluous or secondary stuff on the study guide. It's all of great significance. It's all of great import in relation to the stuff that we covered in relation to your understanding of the materials. Now, if you don't fully understand what the test is going to be like as of yet, then I strongly suggest well, you could email me. I guess you could email me, but email is very tedious. It's very laborious. It's cumbersome. It takes time. Just call me. All right, seriously, just call me. All right, you guys. And by the way, you guys need to get familiar with talking to me because you're gonna have to talk to me on Tuesday. Okay. and you are going to be doing the talking. And I know I keep saying that, and it never eventuates into that kind of scenario whereby it usually devolves upon me to do the talking. But trust me when I say, believe me when I say this, that you are going to be responsible for answering these questions in a competent and comprehensive manner sufficient to satisfy my own purposes in evaluating you. Which is to say that you better know the stuff, not necessarily as well as I know it. I don't expect any of you to know it that well, but to know it well enough to actually speak intelligently on it, right? To sound like you know what you're talking about. Now, what else should I say? This is an interview, all right? I call it an interview because that's what it is, right? And I purposefully use that term. I'm not saying it's going to be a sit down chit chat. I mean, I guess I did call it a chit chat session. I called a lot of things last time I talked about it, which would have been yesterday. But what it actually is, it's an interview, all right? And think of this like a job interview, right? Consider this to be a job interview. Right, so put up. I don't necessarily require you guys to be wearing a tuxedo when you show up on Tuesday for this, but look good, okay? Look good. Take it seriously, all right? Now, I want to see that you are conveying a certain seriousness to me in how you dress, in your demeanor, in your attitude, and how you comport yourself, and that's the 50%, right? Because what did I say when I one of the concessions that I gave to you guys, I gave it freely because you guys weren't demanding anything of me, which was nice. But I said. What I said was, I'm going to give you 50% of the points right off the bat, right out the gate. All right, you get 50% just for showing up, right? But that is conditioned upon, that presupposes that when you show up, you look the part and you act the part, right? Act as though this is like a job interview. And that's part of what I'm doing here. It's not just about, oh, I want you to learn the substance of the material socio-political science. Well, obviously, I do want you to learn that, right? But I also want you to take this seriously and think of this as training for what is eventually at a certain point in time. It's not a matter of when, it's a matter of if. I'm sorry, it is a matter of when, not a matter of if. When it comes to pass that you will sit before, if you haven't already done this, I suspect some of you probably already have, when you sit before a prospective future employer, right? A hiring human resources manager or a supervisor or manager, whoever it is that's doing the hiring interview, and they ask you a series of questions, right? And so that's what this is going to be, a simulacrum of that, all right? So take it as seriously as you would take an interview for a job that you really want to get, right? Now, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm not going to actually ask questions that are immaterial to the study guide. I'm not going to ask you, oh, so how would you contribute to the excellence of our company here, right? What do you bring to the table? What do you bring to the office, right? I'm not going to ask you any questions like that. I'm going to take this seriously, and I'm going to be singularly focused on asking the questions that you need to be responsible for answering, right? Now, that brings me to another point, and I'm going to wrap up my general commentary on the test very soon because I don't want to take up any more time than is absolutely necessary, as I said before. But these are things that are important, and you guys need to understand what you're getting yourselves into on Tuesday. It is very important that you realize that Tuesday needs to be conducted like clockwork. It needs to go off like clockwork, right? And the reason I say that is because I have to assiduously conform to a timetable. Because if I don't, and if I deviate substantially, or even very, very unsubstantially, then I'm going to end up getting behind. Okay, and if I end up getting behind, then what that means is there's going to be delay, right? And the more delay there is, then the more likely that the time I get around to the last interviews, those people are going to be substantially behind the time that they were actually slated to sit down and interview with me, and that's going to be an encumbrance for me, but also an encumbrance for them, which I want to avoid. Now, what we could say is, well, the last man on deck, which is going to be, I'm not going to say any of your guys' names because this is going to be public domain. It's going to go on YouTube, and I don't know if any of you are comfortable with me saying your names, but the initials for the last man, you guys already know what positions you're going to be assigned to, what times you have, because I sent this out in an email, and I got these I don't know, this is the appointment, the calendar. I guess this is just a timesheet, if you will. The last man on deck is SW, okay? So my main man, SW, you know who you are. I know who you are, and if you're comfortable with staying a little bit later than 11:25, and I think you may actually be, because I know when you and I have had a history of talking after class, and usually that goes well past noon sometimes. So I'm going to just go ahead and assume that you can stay a little bit later. So I didn't put you last deliberately because I just assumed that you have an abundance of time and you can just sit around and afford to shoot the shit with me. And definitely no. The reason I did that was because I did this in alphabetical order after I assigned the first person who volunteered to go earlier. And thank you for that, JH. All right, JH. You know who you are, JH. Honorable mention once again to you. You're getting a lot of honors in this class. And I'm certain academic honors will be following soon. So The times are posted, right? Where the times have been sent out to you by email, so you should be familiar with when your time is. But for those of you who are not, and those of you who are too lazy to look, I'll tell you right now. Okay, and the reason I'm going through this is because it's absolutely imperative that you guys are here. You show up not just on time, at exactly 10:08 if that's what your appointment is, at 10:07 59 seconds, right? No, be there at least 5 or 6 minutes earlier, right? Because if you are late, here's what's going to happen. If you are late, right? If you are late and you show up a couple of minutes late to your appointment, right? Well, that's 2 minutes right off the top, right? That's 2 minutes that you're not getting back. Okay, I'm gonna give you, assuming that you show up on time and assuming we start exactly on time. Even if I start late because that's my wrongdoing, then I will accord you the full 12 minutes that you would otherwise be accorded, right? So I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, right? Because that's my responsibility. That's my being negligent, right? That's my mismanaging the people who came before you. But if you happen to show up late, and it doesn't matter if you're 2 minutes late, it doesn't matter if you're 5 minutes late, it doesn't matter if you're 10 minutes late, right? You get what's left in your time, okay? And if you're 2 minutes late, that's 10 minutes. If you're 5 minutes late, that's 7 minutes. If you're 10 minutes late, that's 2 minutes, all right? And that's all you're gonna get, and you're not gonna get any more, right? And if you don't, and there's no way that I can conceive of in my mind, and I have a pretty active imagination, there's no way that I can conceive of you being able to competently and comprehensively answer these questions and demonstrate your fluency with this material, your comfortability with this material in less than, I would say, 10 minutes, honestly. I don't know how you could consolidate so much that you could get this done in anything less than 10 minutes. In fact, 12 minutes is really pushing it. Because I'm only going to ask you 3 questions, right? And part of that's going to be going through the process of discerning which questions you want to ask, what you want to answer, and you don't want to, which ones you don't want to answer. So that's going to take some time. And then, but you're going to sit down, and I'm not going to be my ordinary, normal, gregarious and outgoing and talkative self. I may say, hey, how you doing? Long time no see. How was your weekend? Good to see you again. Welcome back to campus. Hope you don't have COVID. You hope that I don't either. Now let's get right down to it, okay? And that's going to be that. So we don't have time to spare. I don't have time to spare, neither do you. So you got to be there on time. And again, if you are not on time, then the chances of you being able to competently and successfully navigate the rigors and the travails of this exam go down substantially. The more time the more time you miss, the less time you have left, the more likely you're not going to be able to satisfactorily respond to the questions as I ask them. The more likely you're not going to pass this, the more likely you're going to have to take a retake on Thursday, and who knows how that's going to go. Okay, so the times are as follows. The first time is 9:55 to 10:07 a.m. and this is all Tuesday. Okay, this is next Tuesday, which is I think the 29th, whatever the date is. I don't know. You check the calendar. It's not the 29th. It's the 20, whatever 5 days is from today, 28th. So next Tuesday, okay? And this is going to be in our classroom, right? Make sure you show up. Again, look the part. Be ready to do what is requested of you. JH, I know you and I had this conversation in class yesterday. You volunteered to go first, and you also volunteered to go a little bit earlier than we originally stipulated. So you're going to show up at 9:55. Well, before 9:55. Your appointment is from 9:55 to 10:07. HF. My Texas Ranger, my comrade from the deep in the heart of Texas. You are on deck at 10:08 from 10:08 to 10:20. That's your appointment time. So make sure you're there early. And this goes for all of you. EH, you know who you are. You got to be there at 10:21. Okay, your appointment starts at 10:21 and it goes until 10:33. So it's just these are 12-minute time brackets in case you haven't figured that out, right? DJ, you and I actually had a conversation about this, and you're not going to be there because you're exempted because of the conversation that we had and all that entailed. So you don't worry about this. None of this applies to you. And actually, our conversation earlier is going to supersede everything that I'm going to say right now. So this doesn't apply to you. So I guess I'll just take a little break. And actually, I just thought about that now. This is the first time I'm thinking about this because I hadn't actually thought about this until I just looked at this page with your guys' name on it, and I realized that one of your comrades, DJ, is not going to be with us on Tuesday. So that actually gives me more time. Now, if I decide to rearrange this, then I'll go ahead and rearrange it, and I'll send you out an email and let you know that there's going to be new times. I think that might complicate things, and I know I already said I was going to do it this way, and you guys are probably expecting this. So let's just go ahead and plan on doing it the same way that we're going to plan on doing it anyways, right? But this is going to give me more time. So TP, okay, you know who you are. you have to be there at 10:47, and I would recommend you get there much earlier than 10:47 because there's a chance that I may actually take you earlier. All right, I may take you earlier because DJ, the guy who was ordinarily going to be in front of you, is not going to be there that day, right? So you should be there. You should plan on being there no later than 10:30 at the very very latest to make sure you're there and available and ready. So you ostensibly anyways, and if I'm really really behind schedule, then you will go at the time that I get you scheduled at, which is from 10:47 to 10:59. And then we got LW. Your appointment is from 10 to 11:12, and then finally we're going to round this out with SW from 11:13 to 11:25. Okay, so those are the appointment times. Make note of that. Make a mental note. Make a physical note. But make sure you're aware of that because I don't want anybody saying after the fact that I didn't know, I didn't have sufficient notice, Jeff, and I couldn't be there because I didn't know. That's not an excuse because I got it now. It's on record. I can go back to YouTube and said, hey, look, I said it. It's right there in the video. If you didn't watch it, that's your fault. All right. Now, I was originally I was going to plan on addressing some lingering points that would still be associated with the very last slide of the very first PowerPoint slide series, which was slide number 16, and it had a picture of Trump. No, it didn't have a picture of Trump on there. It had a picture of George W. Bush, had a picture of Sarah Palin, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Kwame Kilpatrick, former mayor of Detroit, and I did the voiceovers. I think I did a pretty good Schwarzenegger impression. I think my George W. Bush impression was fairly lacking, but I tried my best to make it as interesting and captivating as possible. And the purpose of that slide, the point, anyways, and I guess this is a redundant point because I already made it before, but I'll make it again, is to just call to your attention that populism is a function, is a feature, and you would say a feature and probably a problem as well, inextricably associated with democracy. You're going to have populist candidates. What is a populist candidate? A populist candidate is somebody who appeals to the sensibilities, the personal sensibilities of the electorate, the people who he or she is talking to directly, and trying to induce that category, that class of people to relate to the candidate personally, right? So in the instance of Sarah Palin, right, I said one of the reasons why people would vote for Sarah Palin, and I think it's a very bad reason, right, was because they looked at her and they said, you know what, she reminds me of myself. She's a soccer mom, she has children, she drives a minivan, she lives in Alaska, and that's reason enough. Okay, I think that those aren't very compelling reasons, right? Again, the problem with populism is the reason you're voting for that candidate has nothing to do with the interests of society or the country as a whole. It has everything to do with the fact that you personally, subjectively, based on your own personal experiences and your own personal expectations, you happen to identify and commiserate more strongly with that particular politician who's running on a populist ticket because that person reminds you of yourself, or because that person is somebody who is living the political life, living the baller life vicariously on your behalf, and you wish you could do that, and so you're going to vote that person in because that's somebody who represents your interests, and you can identify very strongly with that candidate. And the problem with that, okay, the problem with that is a lot of the times the populists who end up getting in office, right, are not elected because they're very good candidates, because they don't necessarily have very good qualifications. Their qualifications, the reason why they're elected on the populist ticket, and the reason why they appeal to the popular sensibilities of the electorate, is precisely because they know that a majority of people, assuming that they're going to get themselves voted into office, can actually identify with them, right? And I guess what the corollary point I would make to all this is to say that I suppose it depends on the demographic, right? So that the populist candidate is only going to be as good as the demographic that elected him or her into office, right? And so if you have a bunch of ignorant and crude and crass and very xenophobic individuals who happen to identify with this particular candidate because that's their man or that's their woman, right? Well, then that's a bad thing, because that candidate is going to embody or personify all of those qualities, right? And they may be very negative, and that may have a deleterious effect on the electorate as a whole, on the country as a whole, depending on what office they happen to be running for, right? So that's one of the points about populism. Now, I may come back to this if I can remember. The next time we actually come back to this is going to be a week from Tuesday, so I'll probably forget. We'll just probably start off with a new slideshow because that's going to be easier. All right. Now, if you still don't have the study guide, right, and I have admonished you already, go out there and print it off if you haven't done that yet. Now pause it again, because I'm about to start talking about this. Now, I'm going to preface my comments on the study guide by saying a couple of things. First of all, and I already said this in the email, but I'm going to clarify right now just for the record so that there's no ambiguity, no confusion, no consternation whatsoever, that you know exactly what I'm going to do and what I'm not going to do, okay? Because this is important, right? Because this is not a dialectical exchange. This is not, you guys don't have the opportunity to go back and forth with a Q&A here with me because it's on YouTube, right? Now, what I'm going to say here is important, all right? So pay attention. I'm going to talk about these subjects, all right, that are covered on the study guide, right? But I'm not necessarily going to do so in a sufficiently comprehensive fashion so as to be compatible with getting an A on this test. So in other words, if all you do is just rely exclusively upon what I'm going to say in the course of the next 25, however long it's going to take for me to get through to this, right? If that's all you do, if you're just writing this stuff down furiously because you're going to have to because I talk fast, right? You write this stuff down, and that's all you go off of, right? And that's what you commit to memory when you come in there on Tuesday and you sit for your interview, right? And that's all you've got, right? And you got nothing else in your back pocket. Expect to get a C or a D or even an F on this test, right? If that's all you got, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a general overview of the subjects, right? The substantive material that relates to that corresponds to these particular questions. But I'm not going to delve into a minutia of detail because we just don't have the time for that. And I don't think you have the patience for that. Furthermore, doing so would strongly disincentivize actually attending class. And I'm very cognizant of this, and you should be as well. Because if I just sat here and gave you everything that you needed, 100% of the answers, everything that you needed to achieve perfect academic success on the test, well, then there'd be no incentive whatsoever for you to actually bother showing up to class. If you knew that I was going to give you the answers the class day before the class day that we take the test, and you know that's how my study guide review sessions are going to go, well, then what's the point of going to class? There is no point, right? So I don't want to disincentivize. I don't want to remove the motivation that otherwise would exist for you, that would otherwise impel you to actually get up in the morning at 9 o'clock, whatever time you set your alarm for, to get to class on time and actually listen and pay attention and take notes. Because and the test is designed in such a way so as to reward the diligence of those who have been paying attention and doing all the sorts of things that I've been recommending ever since week 1. Showing up consistently, taking notes assiduously, reviewing those materials, asking questions when you require clarification, and of course attending this study guide review session, all right? And reading the book. The book is important in this class. I've said it before, I'll say it again, and I'll say it now. The book is important, all right? So if you haven't been doing all those things, then expect to not achieve much success when you go in there and you sit across the table from me or across the classroom from me on Tuesday, depending on how we actually arrange things and configure the room. However, if you do all those things, I'm not going to promise that you will get an A. I'm not going to make that kind of promise. I can't make that pledge because I don't know, how, maybe you'll get confused. I don't think that's going to be the case. I hope that's not going to be the case. And if you do, I'll probably help you out because I tend to be a pretty generous guy. And I understand some of you don't really want to sit down and talk with me. I understand that. I get that, right? Now, I don't think it's because you're scared of me. I don't think I'm a very scary guy. I'm going to dress up nice on Tuesday, all right? So I won't look like my typical self, right? I'll be more sophisticated than wearing this not very classy T-shirt that I'm wearing right now. And the only reason I'm wearing my G4 security hat, in case you haven't noticed, and my excellent sense of style, is because it happens to complement the colors on the flag behind me, which is the flag of the Templars, the Knights Templar, if you must know. If you didn't know that already, right? And I very much doubt any of you did. So there you go. You learned something about history today. Okay. So this is not definitive. Okay. You're going to need more information than what I'm just going to say. And some of these, I don't know how comprehensively I'm going to address. So I'm going to do my best to hit the main points. Okay. I don't have any notes in front of me. All I have is a study guide and it's blank. And so I'll just try to get through this as best I can. Okay. So question number 1, and I would recommend writing this stuff down. I strongly recommend it. Be able to identify and elaborate on the 3 academic disciplines which a proper study of the political science discipline will necessarily incorporate. Remember that it is not merely sufficient to just list these disciplines, but you must also explain why or how they serve to enhance our understanding of political science, right? So the 3 disciplines are, I would say, in descending order of precedence, right? So in terms of hierarchy, right? The first discipline, I would say the most important discipline, is philosophy, right? Philosophy. Now, why is philosophy important and what is its relationship to understanding political science? I would say philosophy is important because philosophy is the study of ideas, how ideas evolve, how we understand and interpret ideas, right? It's human nature, right? And you can't understand the political systems which we have created for ourselves unless you understand human nature, all right? I told you part of this class is going to be an examination of what I like to recall. I think this is kind of a silly phrase, but I'll say it: the nature of human nature, okay? And that's what philosophy addresses itself to, right? It asks the important questions. Why are we here? What is the purpose of all this? What is the point of life? What are we supposed to do? How do you live the good life? How do you strive to be a good, moral, ethical person that is conscientious with respect to your fellow human beings? These are important questions. And why are they important? Because the more philosophical you become, the more you ponder these questions, the more you elucidate them either in your mind or through conversation with somebody else, the more you discover and discern for yourself what is the best way of creating a system of governance that is optimized for maximizing the well-being of the majority of the people. Right now, you can't understand how to achieve that, how to actually instrumentalize or operationalize that, unless you fundamentally understand the nature of humanity, unless you understand what people are, what they want, how they think, what motivates them, what causes them to do what they do. Now that is, of course, that's a little bit psychology, it's social psychology, it's a lot of things, right? But I think it's fundamentally, it comes down to philosophy, right? And that's why much of what we talked about thus far delves into the terrain and the domain of the philosophical. I like to talk about Aristotle and Plato and Socrates as he's ventriloquized through Plato, and the works of Cicero and the other great political philosophers, all the way up to Machiavelli, right? I talk about these people because it's important to understand the development of these ideas as they relate to and influence the trajectory of the evolution of governmental systems, okay? Because governance, and government is inextricably associated with the development of philosophy. I mean, it's no wonder that we've gotten better at governing ourselves in a more just and equitable and more egalitarian way, because we've cultivated ideas, philosophical ideas, throughout the course of human history, all right? And those ideas have evolved, so too have the systems of governance that allow us to control society, right? So I think that all those things are important and integral to understanding the function of philosophy in relation to the understanding of political science. Now, I would say the next most important element, the next most important discipline, which is a subsidiary discipline incorporated under the auspices of the discipline of political science, is law. Okay, you can't understand, and most especially constitutional law. Okay, you can't understand the political system in this country because, after all, this is an American government class. All right, and we're going to be talking. We've already talked a lot about the founding fathers. We can talk some more about them as well. All right, if you haven't gotten tired of them yet, you certainly will be bored of them by the end of probably week 7. But you can't understand the founding fathers unless you understand the Constitution. You can't understand the Constitution. Right, the other way around. You can't understand the Constitution unless you understand the founding fathers. Furthermore, the Constitution, as I've said before, is the rules of the political game that we all play. The rules of the game. Okay, the Constitution stipulates. And it's all there. It's all codified in the Constitution, in the Bill of Rights, or in the subsequent amendments. It says, essentially, it says what rights, what inalienable rights we, the citizenry, are endowed with. Right? At what point the government can act in a way that begins to infringe upon those rights. At what delineating for ourselves the power that the government has, right? And the point at which that power becomes intrusive upon the civil rights and the civil liberties of the individual citizens. Now, you can't understand that demarcation line where the power of the state ends and the sovereign, I shouldn't say the sovereignty of the citizen, because that's the sovereign citizens movement, and hopefully none of you guys are participants of that. But the inviolability of the American citizen, right, begins. Okay, so at what point does the coercive power of the government, the coercive power of the state end, right? At what point does the inviolability, right, the right of you to be the right for you to be free of governmental interference, at what point does that begin? You can't understand that unless you understand the rules of the game. And the rules of the game are codified in the United States Constitution, as well as U.S. Code and other statutes and other promulgations of law. So you have to understand that to be able to understand and contextualize the different forms of government that we have, right? Because we have this tripartite division of government. We have the executive, we have the judiciary, we have the legislative branch. We haven't talked too much about that, right? But you can't understand any of that. The form that the government takes itself. You can't understand the format, as well as the powers that it has, unless you understand the Constitution. So that requires a somewhat nuanced view of law. And the evolution of the law is itself contingent upon the development of philosophy, right? Philosophy and law are inextricably interrelated. They are reciprocal, right? They help inform one another. Okay, so there's a relationship between not just philosophy and political science, but also philosophy and the study of the law. And both those things, philosophy and the law, relate materially and predispose you to understand the nuance of political science. Now, the third discipline is history. Okay, and I'm not just saying this because I teach history and I like history, and that is true, but that's neither here nor there. I mean, I would be saying if I taught biology. All right, history is important. Okay, you can't understand the developmental trajectory of this country, the governmental system, and how it took form and how it evolved, unless you understand the historical events that gave rise to the various amendments that we have had codified in the Constitution. Because the Constitution it's a living document, right? It's an evolving document. We can Congress, well, not we, but not you and I, but Congress, our elected representatives, can enact amendments, right? And you can't understand those amendments. You can't understand the 14th, 15th, and 16th Amendment unless you're able to put that in the historical context of the United States Civil War, right? You can't understand those amendments, right? You can't understand the amendment that incorporates those African Americans, those freed slaves who were previously disenfranchised, right? They didn't have citizenship. They didn't have the right to vote. They weren't a part of the electorate at all. They didn't have any civil participation whatsoever, right? You can't understand the amendments that were promulgated, which effectuated their rights, which gave them rights, which conferred upon them enfranchisement, right? You can't understand that unless you understand the historical context which gave rise, which impelled, which gave impetus to the promulgation of those amendments, which therefore change the Constitution in a fundamental way, right? So history is important because that gives us some context, enables us to more lucidly and comprehensively understand how the Constitution evolved, as well as how we understand government, right? Because government has changed over the course of the last 240 or 50 years, right? Since the founding fathers envisioned this great republic, it has changed greatly, I would say. Okay, our expectations have evolved as well, and you can't understand that unless you're able to put it in a historical context, right? So all those reasons and for more, right? And that was actually a very elaborate and very comprehensive response. I'm not going to keep doing this, right? I have a bad habit of telling you guys too much in these review sessions, but I'm going to stop doing this now, right? So if you said all that, I don't think you'd have time to say all that because that took me, I don't know, it was probably a 7-minute response, right? You guys are going to have about 4 minutes. 5 at the very, 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 very most, right? And if we go into 5 minutes for each response, then the last man on deck is going to end up getting screwed because he's going to end up not getting out of there until 11:30 as opposed to 11:23 or whatever I said, or possibly even later than that. But that's something that he and I will have to discuss, and whether or not he's amenable to that, I don't know. So try to consolidate, right? And that's part of your objective here. That's part of your mandate when you come in there on Tuesday and do this interview. It's not just about being able to speak intelligently on these subjects, right, and tell me what I really need to hear, what I certainly want to hear, but also do so in a manner that comports with the time parameters, the strictures of the timing that we've established for ourselves, which is not easy to do. I'll admit, I'll be the first to admit that. Because I tend to be a rather vociferous person. I use a lot of vocabulary. I take up a lot. I expound a lot and elaborate a lot, and I tend to beat around the bush. I know that, right? So don't do that, right? Don't follow my bad example with respect to trying to be terse and brief and abbreviated and concise, because those are all the sorts of things that you should strive to do when you come in there on Tuesday, and hopefully you can. Okay, number 2. Be prepared to engage with selections from the Federalist number 10, authored by James Madison, which you should all be very, very intimately acquainted with because I spent an entire hour and a half just talking about the Federalist number 10. So I feel that anything that I would say right now would be completely redundant and superfluous to your purposes because I spent so much time talking about this document. And some of you were just looking as though you were so stultifyingly bored at that point that you couldn't bear to listen to any more of my monologue on the Federalist. So hopefully you had your fill on that. But if you didn't, let me get through the rest of this question and we'll deal with it in a systematic fashion. And interpret the significance of some of the more salient passages that this foundational treatise. For example, I may provide you with an excerpt from the Federalist and ask you to explain what significance it has, and what particular argument Madison was trying to make in the context of that particular excerpt. So by excerpt, right, what I'm saying here, and here I actually have the Federalist here, it's right here in front of me. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have this with me on Tuesday, okay? And what I may very well do, and I'm probably going to do this, all right? And whether or not you actually answer this question, well, it's up to you. This may be one of the questions you decide to take a pass on. But remember, you're only going to be allowed a certain amount of passes, right? Until such time as you're going to have to eventually answer some of my questions, right? So maybe this is one of those questions. Well, and I guess what you could do conceivably is you could say, let me see. I guess you could say this is a matter of probability. I don't know enough about probability to say this with a good deal of certainty. But I think what you could do is you could say, well, at least for a couple of these questions, right? Let's say for 2 of these questions, right? I guess probably more than 2. I'd have to sit down and figure this out, and I'm not thinking about this right now. But for a couple of these questions, you could just say, well, if that question shows up, I'm just going to take a pass, so I'm not going to bother wasting my time and effort on trying to acquaint myself with that particular subject matter because it's going to take too much time, and that stuff is just too complicated, and I'm not going to waste my time. And that if that question comes up, like I said, I'll just say, no, I don't want to answer that question, and throw next question, Jeff. That's entirely your prerogative, right? But remember, at a certain point in time, you are going to have to answer some questions, okay? So maybe this is one of those questions that you just think is just going to be too overly burdensome and overly complicated. And I'm not just saying this because it's question number 2 and it deals with the Federalist number 10. I'm just saying, it could be any of these questions. Maybe you thought number 10 was an unduly complicated question. Maybe that's the one that you decided for yourself. If there's any question that I really don't want to answer, it's that question, right? But maybe it's number 2. I don't know. You guys decide for yourselves. If that's the way you want to play it, that's fine, right? I personally, I can't in good faith recommend that because I am your professor after all, and I have to encourage you to go out there and to try to assimilate as much of this information as possible, right? So in theory anyways, ostensibly, you should go out there and you should take all these questions seriously, and you should have an equal aptitude and fluency and competency with respect to each and every one of them, no more, no less for any of them. And that's in theory, and I realize that there's a vast, wide dichotomy, the departure between theory and practice, but that's what you should strive for. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read selections from what I would do for number 2. Is I can't really do too much of this because, like I said, I don't really have a lot of time. I don't want to take away time because this is a zero-sum game. The more time I spend reading or talking or doing whatever I'm doing, right, therefore the less time you're going to have, right? So I have to be very, very brief because I don't want to take away from your time. So if I was to do anything, if I was to hit you with number 2 here, I would say I would read a passage, right? I would read something like this. I would say this is Madison. I'm quoting Madison verbatim here. There are again 2 methods of removing the causes of faction. The one by destroying the liberty which is essential to its existence. The other by giving every citizen the same opinions, the same passions, and the same interests. Okay, so I mean I could read that passage, right? And I could say what is Madison trying to communicate about faction there? Actually, that's a bad example because that particular passage is very explicit. That already tells you what you need to know. There's no interpretation there. What I would do, I guess, is I would ask you, okay, maybe I wouldn't read this stuff because it's going to take too much time. What I'm going to do here, I'm sorry guys, maybe I should have thought of this before I started speaking on this video, but who cares? What I'm going to do is I'm just going to throw you some questions. I'm going to throw some questions out there about this document, and you're going to have to just refer back to it. And maybe I'll just give you I'll tell you what. I'll have a non-annotated version of the Federalist number 10, right? So one that I haven't highlighted or made any notes on, and I'll give you it, okay? If you really need that, okay? If you feel you really need that, right? But if it's that bad, if you don't know it sufficiently to be able to address the questions that are really pertinent to this document, then I suggest you take a pass on that question. Because otherwise you're going to end up spending a lot of time just looking at the document, trying to read it and get acquainted with whatever the hell it is I'm trying to ask you. So I don't really feel as though I really need to elaborate on this because, and honestly, the more I think about this, the less inclined I am to actually ask this particular question because the more I think about this, the more it's probably not going to be a good question to ask because it's going to take too much time for us to identify what the hell I'm even talking about. It's going to waste your time. It's going to waste my time. It's going to set us back. So, why don't we just do this? I'm going to make a notation myself right now because this version of the study guide is the same version of the study guide I'm going to bring it on Tuesday with me when I ask you guys your interview questions. I'm going to go ahead and say number 2. Can I say this? How many do we have? We have 12. Okay, yeah. All right. Number 2 is off the table. Okay. Right, so this is valuable, right? This is a valuable learning experience, right? Because I just saved you guys the time and the trouble and the hassle and the inconvenience and the frustration that would otherwise be associated with preparing yourself for question number two, which I know would be a lot of those things because that would be a pretty complicated question, right? So number two, I'm saying this categorically, unequivocally, number two is off the table. It's not going to be, I'm not going to ask you number two. I'm Xing it out. I'm already drawing a bunch of X's over it in red, all right? So I see this. And if for any reason I ambush you with number two on Tuesday, you remind me, all right? You hold me to this YouTube video. You say, Jeff, go out there, log into YouTube, and see what you said to all of us, right? You hear your words, watch yourself, remember what you said, and number two is not fair game because you said that very explicitly. Okay, so number two, we're not going to deal with. All right, number three. What did Madison think? All right, so here we're getting into other stuff about the Federalists, and that's why I say number two is off the table. What did Madison think about the potential for what he refers to as faction in the context of the United States? I said, when I talked about this last week or the week before, whenever we were talking about this, I said a couple of things, right? I said, I think what Madison was essentially saying, what his concern was that faction is like special interest groups, okay? We could also say, so special interest groups are particular political organizations that have a particular political agenda, and usually it's very specific, right? So for instance, you have people who are fans of the NRA. They support the National Rifle Association. They're very adamant about defending their constitutional Second Amendment rights, which I happen to actually be one of those people. But they tend to be one-issue voters, right? And that's the thing that is most important to them, right? And then conversely, you have other voters who make it their mission in life to go out there and to try to promulgate legislation which reduces and constrains the capacity of people to own and to bear and to own and to maintain firearms, right? And so this is one of those things where you have this very sharp divide. It's in very sharp relief, right, between those who are on one side of this issue, right, and their vociferous support for it, right, and then you have those who fall on the other side of the issue, right, and they're just as adamant, just as persistent, just as tenacious, right, in their support for countering, right, for taking the position that is the opposite of the people who support the Second Amendment, right? And this is one of those things where you have these special interest groups and they come down on either side of a particular issue, right? And that creates contention and division and divisiveness. And this is one of the concerns that Madison had, and he envisioned this, right? Now, the other thing that I would say is that's a very salient concern for us now in 2020, it has been for the last few years, is what they refer to as identity politics, okay? So identity politics means that you tend to commiserate and identify with people who look like you, who talk like you, who sound like you, who come from a similar background socioeconomically, and you tend to vote in accordance with what you think is the best interest for people like that who are similar to you, okay? So it's essentially tribalism, right? We didn't talk a lot about tribalism. In fact, I don't even think I've thrown that term into the mix yet, but tribalism is essentially identifying with people who remind you of yourself, right? And tribalism conduces towards, right, or eventuates into, leads to, precipitates the fear or hatred of the other, xenophobia, a distrust and mistrust of other people who look different than you, who sound different than you, who have different religious beliefs, right, or subscribe to a particular life outlook or philosophy that is divergent from your own, right? So tribalism is a problem, right, and it is becoming even more of a problem. I would say it's a more serious problem now in 2020 than ever. Well, honestly, than ever it was before in this country, in the history of this country, at least in the recent history of this country. You can go back long enough. You go back to the Civil War 160 years ago, and you can say, well, tribalism was a pretty big deal back then, wasn't it? Because it caused precipitated the Civil War, and yeah, I would say yeah, absolutely, it was a big deal then, right? But it's also a big deal now, okay? And I think that was one of the things that Madison was talking about, and he certainly anticipated that in his treatise here on faction, because that's really what the Federalist number 10 is all about. It's all about talking about how when you have a democracy, right, when you have especially a pure democracy, right, that is maximally conducive to the development of faction, because people have a great deal of liberty and they're free to express their opinions in whatever form those opinions may take. And he said people are precarious and people are passionate, right, and people follow their passions, and they tend to not be able to think logically and coherently because their capacity for thinking that way is obscured and obfuscated by their passions. And if you're directed too extensively by your passions, then you're going to invariably end up getting into confrontation with other people because you can't necessarily reconcile and resolve your differences, right? Now that's another point that Madison was making about all this, and I'm saying way too much here. I'm giving it all away, and I got to stop doing this, right? Number 4. And I suppose there is more to say on this, okay? Because I know when I talked about these things in class, I mean, I said a lot about each and every one of these points, okay? I made sure that the questions that I put on the study guide are questions that I'm absolutely very familiar with, and I know that you're familiar with because I know I spent a lot of time elaborating on these questions. And if you weren't there for this or you didn't take good notes, you were asleep, then that's your problem, all right? It's not my problem, so don't look at me because I gave you guys these answers. Well, you should already have this information. This should not be new. This should be deja vu for all of you. If it's not, then I suggest you examine just how seriously you've been taking this class for the last 5 weeks. Number 4, what does Madison propose as a viable solution to mitigate the deleterious effects of faction? I already read what he proposed. This is going back to the excerpt that I actually happen to be talking about, right? So he said there are two possibilities for removing faction. Number 1, to essentially equalize everybody, right? Actually, that's number 2. Number 1, by destroying liberty, okay? By rendering people incapable of actually expressing their ideas, of going out there and publicly articulating their particular position in a way that resonates with others, right? So effacing and excising liberty from the Constitution, removing that as a possibility, right? Infringing upon what ought to be considered an inalienable right, a right that all citizens are endowed by virtue of having been created by a creator, right? And this is something that, again, the founding fathers really believed in this because they actually used this language explicitly in the Constitution and in the foundational documents that led up to its creation. And so that's number 1, right? So the one way of ensuring that there's not a lot of factionalism is dispossessing everybody of their liberty, right? The rights, okay? The fundamental right to go out there and express your opinion, right? Essentially, we're talking about the First Amendment, right? Freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, that sort of thing, right? Number 2, what you do is you try to get everybody to think in the same way, is what he says, right? You get everybody to think in the same. You try to direct people in a way so as to cause them to think about every issue that arises in the course of the national conversation in a way that is completely consistent with the way everybody else thinks about that, right? Now, that's step 1 of the analysis, okay? Step 2 of the analysis is to tell me why is that a problem? Why is that an inexorable problem? Why is that an inescapable problem? Why is there nothing that we can really do to we may be able to try to ameliorate that, but it's something that I shouldn't say the problem itself is not subject to remedy, but rather the solutions that are being advocated by Madison, these 2 solutions, are not necessarily very expedient, okay? And this is just if you're a realist, if you're pragmatic, all right? If you've lived any longer than 15 years in this world, any longer than 12 years, you'll know enough about the world to at least know that you can't necessarily control the opinions of the multitude, right? You can't tell people that they must think this way. People are going to think the way they're going to think regardless of what you want them to think, okay? And that's just, again, this is going back to the nature of human nature, this conversation that we had in terms of the philosophy of humankind and mankind, the way we are. We are so constituted in such a way so that we are passionate creatures. We are prejudicial people, right? We tend to gravitate towards things that inspire us, that captivate us, that cause us to think about others in a certain particular way, right? And therefore we advocate for that or we disagree with it, right? But we're going to express our opinions because we are endowed with the capacity to be opinionated. And we are, that is our nature, right? It is an extension of human nature to be an opinionated creature, to be an opinionated individual, right? To have ideas about certain things and to want to express those ideas so as to convince other people that you're right about this particular thing, about X, Y, and Z, whatever it happens to be. Right? Now, the other thing I would say is the problem with this is that you can't constrain liberty, okay? You can't restrict liberty because if you did that, then you regress, okay? You fall back into the very same condition that the Americans were in before they fought the British, before they won their independence. You'd be living under a tyranny. The government would take a very tyrannical form. It would take a very, not necessarily an autocratic form, but it would take a very obtrusive form, where it would be intruding itself into the daily lives and the personal liberties of the individual constituent citizens. And that would be something that would be highly offensive to the sensibilities of Madison and his fellow co-authors of the Constitution. Right? So you can't do those things, all right? So that's a solution. It's a non-viable solution because it can't be reconciled with principles of liberty and personal freedom and all the sorts of inalienable rights that these guys are very interested in codifying. That was a very complete answer, by the way. That probably took me about at least 4 minutes to answer that. I'm doing a very bad job at only giving you guys part of the responses. I'm doing a very bad job because I'm giving you guys complete responses. And I'm already halfway through this, more than halfway through this, because there's only 11 questions as opposed to 12. And we're coming up on an hour, so I only have to finish this up pretty soon. All right, number 5. What are some of the concerns that Madison has regarding the creation of a legislative body? All right, so I'm going to be very terse now, I promise. I'm going to be very brief, all right? I'm not going to expound. What he said, refer back to the Federalist, number 10, okay? And what he said, this is where he's talking about, I think this is in the second or third page, he starts talking about how we need to have a legislative body which isn't too big, okay, which isn't overly inclusive, right? Not because if you have too many representatives, that's a problem. If you have a representative for Houghton and Hancock and Calumet and Lorien and Chassell and Bet Grease and Bootjack, right? And all these other little hamlets all around here, and there's dozens of them, as you guys are well aware of, more well aware than I am. If you have a congressional representative for each and every one of those constituent districts, and you have literally hundreds of tens of thousands of districts across the United States, what that is going to do is going to ensure that the interests of the representative are going to be tied to the constituency which he or she happens to represent. And those interests are going to be very narrowly focused, right? They're going to be very narrowly defined in terms of demographics, because you only have a certain type of people that live in the town of Chassell, for instance, right? I don't think you have a lot of Indian Americans. I'm not talking about Native Americans. I'm talking about Indian American, Pakistani Americans. That's a better example, right? I don't think you have a lot of Pakistani Americans living in Chassell. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's a burgeoning Pakistani American community there, right? I don't think you have a lot of Hindus or Chaldeans or Arab Americans there, right? Or Italian, maybe Italian. I don't know. I don't know who you have living. Probably Finnish Americans and Eskimos, right? Beyond that, I don't think you have many people, right? The whole 10 people that live there, right? And so the problem with that is that your interest as a representative of the people is particularized to the people whom you represent. And those people are not necessarily reflective of the general demographic, the general national demographic, right? Because they're too small a representative sample, right? It's like taking a sample of one individual, take me, right? Take Jeff, right? And then extrapolate based on what you know about Jeff. Well, he knows history. He studied law for a while. He likes historical flags from the Crusades. He likes G4. He used to work for G4S. And then say, I can infer everything that's necessary for me to infer about him. I can know everything about Americans based on a sample of one. No, you can't tell that, and you certainly can't tell that based on a sample of even 100, right? And so that's one of the problems. Is it's too many, and not only that, but think about the confusion and the absolute utter legislative chaos that would impede the process of actually promulgating laws. Right? Because you'd have all these various constituent interests, and they would be highly divergent, and it would be very, very hard to reach a consensus. Okay, that's the problem with having the multitude, too many representatives. That's the problem, right? Now, I got to stop doing this, right? That's a very good explanation. That was a very good elucidation of that particular side of that particular question. But there's two sides to that, right? What's the other side? Well, I'll leave you with the other side, right? The other side is, I'll give you a hint, right? If there's too few representatives, what might that lead to? What's the problem with too few representatives, right? I'll give you a hint. It's in the text, okay? It's in the text of the Federalist number 10, and it's not on page 2. It's on page. It's on the second to last page. And he says, well, I know what he says. I just saw what he said, and I saw my notes. But he said something about. Well, I'm not going to give it away. I can't. I'm telling you guys too much. Go refer to your notes. I know I gave an explanation in class, and I told you I'm not going to give you an A-level answer on each and every one of these questions, and thus far I have been. So I got to stop doing that. Okay. Number 6. What can we infer about Madison's opinion of human nature generally on the basis of what he wrote in the Federalist number 10? Be able to cite specific examples from the text to support your conclusions. Well, I would say, and this is just a very general representation of the views of Madison, but I would say, and based on our conversation in class, my monologue in class, I would say that Madison mostly thought that people were not worthy of being trusted, that the common people were too ignorant, too slavishly devoted to their senses, too prejudicial, right? Too passionate, and too inclined to follow those passions and prejudices in a way which led them astray from their reason and their logic and their capacity to think things through objectively and dispassionately. And he was concerned about these things because he's talking about faction, and faction is only going to result if, in fact, you have a confrontation, if you have a conflict of interest, right? And you can't resolve those differences or reconcile them. And so part of what you could say is, by virtue of the fact that Madison seemed to be preeminently concerned with faction, okay, that in and of itself, that concern that he has, suggests something about what he thought about human nature, does it not? Right? If he's concerned about people having all these sorts of fights over things that are trivial, and he even says this, I don't know if that's his exact words verbatim, but he says something to the effect of very, very small differences, right? Remember, I was talking about Freud, and Sigmund Freud said one of the problems with people in general, one of the most inexorable problems, and the thing that causes catastrophic consequences, is what he referred to as the narcissism of small differences. Okay, and I think that's exactly what Madison was referring to. He's saying there's very small disagreement between most people, whether Republicans or Democrats, Federalists, Anti-Federalists, whatever they happen to be. The difference between them is not very substantial, but they cling so tenaciously to their particular conception of how things ought to be that they're going to fight, and they're going to hold steadfastly to their convictions, and they're going to be implacable, and you're not going to be able to convince them otherwise, right? Dispossess them of disabuse them of their beliefs. And so that's one of the things that Madison said about that suggests what he thought about human nature. He also said, if you, I mean, there's so many instances here. There's so many instances here where Madison gets into this. But I'm looking at the second page here now, and one of the things that he talks about is that the people's opinions are always going to be subject to their passions and prejudices. So people can't, ordinary normal people, right? The people who he's referring to that are going to be responsible for essentially electing the elected representatives, these people are going to be unable to think analytically and dispassionately and objectively. And therefore, they can't think reasonably. If they can't think reasonably and rationally, then therefore they can't really adjudicate matters appropriately in a way that's maximally conducive to the best interests and the highest flourishing of the most amount of people, right? Because that's ostensibly, philosophically, theoretically, that's what you should strive to do, is, again, promulgate a system of governance that maximizes the best interests of the majority of the people, right? That's what you should strive for, right? That's an idealistic sort of thing, okay? But that's what you should really want to do, right? And Madison is making the case that you can't do that because people tend to be too passionate. They tend to, their reason and their sense of justice and their sense of objectivity is obscured by their personal petty prejudices. And that's a problem because it's endemic to the human condition. He even says this. Okay. I'm going to finish this up in like the next 10 minutes, guys. I promise. Because it's 8 o'clock. Skyrim is calling me over here. I got to answer the call. And I'm getting tired. It's been a long day. I got up early today. I taught a history class this morning. But anyways, so let's get through this. Number 7. What was paradoxical and even hypocritical about the writings of Madison regarding the influence of personal prejudice and subjective interest as it could conceivably contaminate the legislative process? I think this is a very easy question because I talked in great detail about this in the closing remarks that I had about the Federalist Number 10. So Madison's critique of the legislative process, he was saying that the problem with legislatures, any legislature, whether it's the Senate, whether it's the House of Representatives, unicameral, bicameral, doesn't matter, right? Is that they're human beings, that they're people, right? And by virtue of them being people, they are going to have some personal subjective interest that is going to modulate or interfere with their capacity to otherwise look at the laws that they're promulgating, that they're enacting through legislation, right? To look at those things completely objectively, right? And therefore, they're always going to have, the legislators themselves, the members of Congress themselves, are going to have some particular pecuniary interest. Well, either a pecuniary interest or some subjective selfish interest, right? And that is going to be tied to the laws that they are enacting, ostensibly for the benefit of all people collectively. Okay, and you can't say that those laws are being necessarily promulgated for the exclusive benefit of all people collectively if that particular legislator has a personal subjective interest in voting in the way that he's voting to support that particular amendment or to not support that particular amendment, right? And he or she, as a legislator, is of course going to be going to think about these things in a way which relies upon his or her own experiences and their own expectations as a human being. Now that's the critique that Madison had, okay, generally of the political process, right? That's the problem that he had with the legislative process. He said that it's going to be subject to the passions and the prejudices of the people, because after all, they're just people just like you and me. They may be in Washington, they may be in Congress, but after all, they're still people fundamentally. So that's going to be a problem, right? And then what he does, what does he do? He goes, he turns around, and he creates this document, this Federalist number 10, and he's writing all about how he's advocating for republicanism is what he's advocating for. Not republicanism as in large R republicanism, not the Republican Party, right? But republicanism over a pure democratic system, right? And Madison is advocating for this, well, apparently engaged in an active cognitive dissonance because he's apparently unaware of the fact that he's criticizing people for acting out on their particular political prejudices or their particular political passions, right? And allowing those passions and prejudices to modulate how they actually engage in the political process and chastising them for doing so, right? That's his criticism of them. But he's doing essentially the same thing. He's advocating for the creation of a republic. Okay, that's what he's saying. He's saying that people can't necessarily be trusted because they're too ignorant, they're thoughtless, they're too prejudicial. You know, you can't trust these people. They're too stupid to know what's in their own good, and so on, right? And he's advocating therefore for a republic which has a certain elite representation, right? For people who are too unsophisticated to know what's in their own best interest. He's recommending that we have somebody else represent them, somebody who's more philosophically trained, somebody who's more educated, so who's more erudite, who's more objective and analytical and dispassionate, right, etc. So he's recommending that, okay? And that's what he wants. He wants that. He personally thinks that's his personal opinion, okay, that a republic is a good thing, right? And he's recommending a republic to his readers, the readers of the Federalist number 10 in this particular case, right? But he's doing so while also criticizing the prospective future members of Congress for enacting legislation which they personally favor. Now, do you see that as being duplicit? Do you see that as being ironic, right? Because he's criticizing those future prospective legislators for doing the same thing that he's essentially doing in this document, all right? For allowing his own personal opinions to in many ways influence the way in which he's going to develop this argument and the way he's going to try to present this argument in a way which favors him. He himself, Madison, was an elitist, right? Most of these guys were elitists. They were wealthy, they were landowners, some of them were slave owners, they had a lot of influence, a lot of clout. They were educated, very educated, right? And so, of course, the system that he is recommending, the republic, is going to favor the elite. He, Madison himself, is in fact a member of that elite, okay? He's going to therefore benefit from that which he is advising and recommending to the people in his writings here in the Federalist number 10. I sense hypocrisy in that in relation to what he says when he's criticizing legislators for doing essentially the same thing that he's doing himself. If you said all that, by the way, you'd be gold for that, okay? And that was right about 5 minutes. I'm keeping it, I'm circumscribing it to the time constraints. Number 8, what arguments can be made in support of the creation of a representative democracy? And how might this form of governance be preferred to a pure democracy? Well, the representative democracy is one whereby the people are not directly participating in the political process. They are electing members, congressmen or senators or elected representatives, whatever you want to refer to them as. They're electing people to represent their interests in a legislature. Okay, that is the difference between representative democracy. Okay, that's what a representative democracy is versus a pure democracy. A pure democracy is when people come together and they vote on whatever the particular petition is before them, and each man, woman, or child, usually it's men, right? But each citizen, however you qualify citizenship as, right? Each citizen is given one vote per person, right? Now, what is the problem with that? Okay, what is the problem with that? Well, I said there were a couple problems with this, and this is going back to the point that I was making about 5th century Athens. I was going back and I was talking about Athens in 454 BC in the Peloponnesian War, and you don't need to know the history of ancient Athens. But what I was saying is that Athens, and this is I think this is just 2 days ago or yesterday when I talked about this. It would have been Tuesday, which was yesterday. I was saying that in Athens, you had these guys who were very shrewd, very charismatic, very effective, very persuasive speakers, and they were known as demagogues, right? And they could unduly influence the people to vote in a way that was maximally beneficial and advantageous for their personal interests, while convincing the people that it was actually in the interest of all the people to vote for that particular proposition, right? So the problem with pure democracy is that it's subject to the whims, the capriciousness of the crowd. And you never know what the crowd is going to vote for because it depends on how persuasive the speaker is. And if he's a very persuasive speaker, and if he's a populist sort of guy, and people identify with him, and he's very charismatic, and he's very persuasive, it's all the sorts of things that you need to be an optimal, very good politician, that it's conceivable in a pure democratic system that you could conceivably vote for somebody who actually takes that system and transforms it into a dictatorship, or takes that system and abuses the goodwill and the trust of the people, and uses it for his own nefarious megalomaniacal purposes, right? Now again, the other problem with pure democracy, and this is a Madisonian argument because this sort of originates with many of the points that he incipiently made in the Federalist. Number 10 is that, well, can you really trust people? Okay, can you trust them, or are they too impulsive? Are they too impetuous? Are they too inclined to give into their prejudices and their passions? And I would say that that is in fact oftentimes the case. And so, therefore, the argument for representative democracy is to say that we need representatives who meet certain qualifications. Okay, and that the electoral process necessarily selects for representatives of the people to speak on their behalf, to make decisions in the interest of the collective, right? Who are competent and qualified by virtue of their education and their experience and their character and the other sorts of qualities that would line up with them being successful in making these kinds of determinations, right? So you have a selection process which ensures that the people who are actually representing the interests of the people in a representative democracy, right, are more well qualified to make those kinds of decisions than just the simple, plain, ordinary people themselves, right? Now, the other side of that argument is to say that, well, representative democracy is a bad thing because it empowers the elites, right? Yes, it selects for certain qualities, it selects for certain criteria, but the sorts of qualities and criteria that it selects for are actually mostly aligned with the characteristics that define people who are in the elite class of citizens, right? They have money, they have influence, they have a superlative education, right? Because they had the opportunity to have that education because their father or their parents had money to fund that education, and so on and so forth. And you could make that argument. You could say, well, representative democracy isn't really truly representative if it's just the people who are the elites representing the interests of the common people. They're ostensibly representing those interests, but in actuality, those elites are making decisions based on their own personal subjective interest, based on what they think is a good idea, not based on what their constituents think is a good idea. Okay, and so that's the argument against representative democracy. But I think there are more arguments for it than are against it. But again, you can tell which side of the line I come down on the Madison, the Federalist, anti-Federalist divide, the humanist, populist divide. I'm more inclined to cast my lot with the Madison camp. And that's one of the reasons why we're spending a lot of time on him. Not only is he an important founding father, but he had a lot of great ideas. Okay, that was number 8. Number 9, differentiate between the Federalist and anti-Federalist positions and list out their representative propositions concerning the structure of the government. Okay, very, very, very quickly, all right, because I'm coming up on an hour and 10 minutes, and I think we're only supposed to have an hour and 20 minutes in this class, so I've got like 9 minutes to close escrow on the last 3 questions here, which isn't very much time. Remember what I said, okay, and I showed this on the board. I think I was doing this yesterday. I was talking about Cleator and Kudus and Jethro and West Virginia, and I even think I mentioned Burt Reynolds and that wonderful movie Deliverance. That hopefully is nostalgic in a good way for you because it brings back all those good memories of that conversation that we had. But hopefully it also causes you to think about the sorts of things that I talked about in elucidating the dichotomy between the Federalists and the anti-Federalists. And I think one of the things you could say is that the Federalists, one of the main things is that the Federalists support big, strong central government, okay? And that they believe that the state has the ultimate power, that the state is sovereign, and that the citizens need to defer to and respect and obey the power of the state. and a centralized state, a centralized federal government. The anti-federalists believe that instead of the federal government, the strong central federal government in Washington, D.C., or wherever the federal capital is going to be, right? They believe that the power needs to be parcellated out amongst the states. That the states themselves, not the single coherent United States as one single monolithic entity, right? But the states themselves, whether there's 50, whether there's 13, depending on how many states at different times, right? But the states themselves need to have power that supersedes in many ways the power of the federal government. That the states are essentially sovereign entities unto themselves, right? That's the anti-federalist argument. Now, remember what I was saying, right? If the anti-federalists had their way, and remember what I said. This is where history comes in. Did the anti-federalists get their way? They almost got their way, right? The high water mark of the Confederacy, 1863, Gettysburg. If Lee had won the Battle of Gettysburg, if the Army of Northern Virginia had defeated the Army of the Potomac, then we'd all be a bunch of anti-federalists, wouldn't we? Because that's what the Civil War was really all about, right? It was about states' rights and whether or not the state had the right to legislate, to codify laws that would supersede and take precedence to the laws that would be codified by the National Congress in Washington, right? That was one of the concerns that these state rights advocates had. So if you're an anti-federalist, you believe in the supremacy of the states in relation to the federal government. But that anticipates certain problems, does it not? That works against the grain in terms of social cohesion and national unity. It creates division and divisiveness and contention because everybody's going in different directions depending on their particular sensibilities. Depending on where you live, depending on what your culture is, whether you're from Texas, or Missouri, or Arkansas, or Mississippi, right? Or if you're from Montana, or you're from Alaska. I don't know how they speak in Alaska, right? Or you're just from Michigan, right? Say it that way, right? Or Boston. I'm from Boston. That's a very bad Boston. Watch any movie with Mark Wahlberg. That's how the Bostonians, that's how the Massachusetts people talk. I should know. I went to Boston University. I graduated there. But that's the problem with the anti-federalists is they suggest that we should have 50 different states making 50 different decisions on behalf of themselves. And that would be highly antithetical to the interests of a unified country. I submit to you humbly. Right? Now, what is the problem with federalism? I'm giving it all away again. I'm not going to tell you. I already told you enough. I said too much. I'm going to shut up. Okay. So write all that down, and there's some more to that as well. There's some more to that question as well. But I leave that to your good judgment and discretion to come up with the rest of that answer, and hopefully you will, because I think it's an easy one. In what ways is your conception of the utility and viability of pure democracy contingent upon what you believe about human nature generally? I already addressed this in the context of discussing the Federalist number 10. I can just leave it at that. I can just say period. End of story. But I know you're expecting me to say something about this, so I guess I'll give the people what they want. Rule number 1 about being a politician and a good professor: give the students what they want. And I've created a reasonable expectation, so I better meet that expectation. Okay, so I'll very, very briefly. All right, and I've got 4 minutes now. What did I just ask? So what this really comes down to is whether or not you think that do you think as Thomas Hobbes thought, or do you think as Jean-Jacques Rousseau thought? Right? And I talked about Hobbes and I talked about Rousseau way back when we first started our conversation about the intersection between philosophy and political science. Hobbes thought that life and humans were nasty, brutish, and short. We're a bunch of savage brutes, and we are selfish, and we, if given the opportunity, if a state of nature existed without laws and without the strictures of government, without the power and the authority and the sovereignty of government, then we would devolve into chaos and disorder, and it would be survival of the fittest, and we'd be out there killing and raping and maiming and taking everything and dispossessing everybody of all that they had. And the strongest would survive, and the weak would die, and that would be a totally chaotic and completely unjust situation because might would always make right. And that's one conception of human nature. Okay, the other conception of human nature. And I think you should really extend this argument further, right? Give me some examples as to why you think the way you do about human nature, right? But come down on one side. I guess I'm asking you to come down on both sides, right? So you have to discuss both sides of this. I would give some examples though. One example that I just read about today, and you could find a million examples in life around you, but one example that I found about was I was reading about the pandemic protection. It's the PPE or whatever, and not personal protection equipment, but it was one of the legislative acts that was recently introduced into Congress and it passed, and it was meant to provide supplementary financial aid to small businesses. It was a $4 trillion. It was billions. It wasn't trillions, but billions, right? And there was so much fraudulence in terms of people abusing that system and taking advantage of that money, which was meant to aid small businesses, which were indeed are really truly suffering. Right? You look around Houghton and Hancock, and there's a lot of small businesses that just they can't get by, and they need that money. And there are people out there that have been making all sorts of misrepresentations of material fact and getting that money, right? And this is true of the welfare. This is true of the pandemic assistance money, okay? The state unemployment money, right? The unemployment system in Michigan is so convoluted and in a situation of absolute and utter chaos right now because there are so many people who filed claims, illegitimate claims that they ought not to have been filing, but they wanted to defraud the state out of money that they didn't rightfully have an entitlement to, right? And that to me suggests a lot about human nature. Okay, it says to me that Hobbes was actually onto something. Hobbes is right. People are greedy and selfish and narcissistic and inclined to give into those tendencies that make them vile and reprehensible and despicable. But you could also say, well, that's not always true. That's not categorically true. You take a man as he is, right? And you judge him as he is individually, right? And so the other side of that, right, the flip side of that coin is what Rousseau said, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, French philosopher from the 17th century. Rousseau said that actually humanity, human beings, are inclined naturally and instinctively and impulsively to be altruistic and to be selfless, not selfish, right? Selfless and to be caring and compassionate and considerate and to look out for one another. And if left to their own devices, we would create an idealistic sort of utopian society whereby all people would partake equally of all the collective resources that we have. Now, I think that that is a bit too naive, a bit too credulous, and a bit too idealistic. And it doesn't comport with my own personal experiences, having lived in this life for 40 years now and having seen what I saw. And I don't think it comports with your experiences either. But you come down either way. I don't care. But you got to make an argument one way or the other, right? Make sure you identify both of those topics. And if you don't, I'm going to bring you back to it and ask you to do so. Okay? So I will ask follow-up questions if you don't tell me what I want to hear. All right, number 11. This is the very last question here. And Christ, I'm coming up to an hour and 20 minutes. I apologize, guys. I wanted this to be half an hour, and you guys are really cutting into my Skyrim time now. All right, so I'm going to really blast through this last question. No, not last question. I keep saying last question. There's two more questions. What foreseeable problems may arise in a pure democracy that could impede the implementation of a just, fair, and rational system? This question goes back to what I was talking about with respect to Athens, the pure democracy in Athens, and the capacity of people to have their opinions unduly influenced by a few demagogues, a few very charismatic, very shrewd, very manipulative, very megalomaniacal politicians who get their way and who are able to influence and induce the rest of the people to just go along with them, while the people are too ignorant and unsophisticated to realize that they're being taken advantage of for the purposes, nefarious ends of this other politician, right? So this ties back into number 8, I think, okay? They're similar, all right? Now, I think there is a difference between these two, and I'm not going to tell you what it is, all right? I'm going to give you a hint. I'll just tell you there's a difference because they actually relate to two different things that I said at two different times. But it's up for you to differentiate the difference because I'm making this way too easy, guys. This is just way too easy. If I continue to do this, then there really is going to be no incentive to actually go to class because I've essentially thus far I've given you mostly A responses to these questions, right? At the very least B responses, but mostly A responses, A minus responses. Number 12. In what ways might a democratic system actually be less effective than a more autocratic system, a more autocratic form of government, which is not subject to the consent of the people? Also be able to provide at least one example of how we just talked about this last time. Right? The response to COVID. Think about how haphazard and contrived and tedious and uncoordinated and ineffectual the national response to COVID was here on behalf of the Donald Trump administration. Now, I would be saying this if it was the Obama administration. I'd be saying it was the Hillary Clinton administration, or indeed if it was the Biden administration, right? It doesn't make a difference, okay? This transcends partisan politics, right? The fact of the matter is it has more to do with the fact that we are a democracy, a Republican democracy that is founded on a republic, than the politics of the incumbent who happens to occupy the Oval Office at any given time, right? But what made that response so ineffectual was the fact that we have a system which disallows for the president to actually take a very concerted response. Or if he does take a concerted response, that he knows is going to alienate certain of his constituents. He's not going to be able to run for re-election, or he's not going to win enough votes in November. And Donald Trump, as I said, knew, because he's a savvy enough politician to realize this. If he doesn't know anything else, he certainly knows this, that if he implemented martial law back in March or April, anytime between now and then, Well, he would have disenfranchised a lot of the people that will otherwise vote for him because they're very big on not having their personal civil liberties infringed upon arbitrarily by a big government. Okay, so by virtue of the fact that we are a democracy, by virtue of the fact that the presidency is a popularity contest, there are certain things that the president really can't, even though he can technically do certain things, he's legally, constitutionally empowered to take certain actions, he won't do those things because it's not politically expedient for him to do those things because he knows he's going to alienate and disenfranchise a lot of people that will otherwise vote for the guy, right? And so that's why he's not going to enact martial law. Not because it's not the best thing to do, because it actually would be the best thing to do. If we just shut everything down for 3 weeks back in March, we said, all right, don't go shop, do all your shopping on one day, get all your shit, go back to your house and live there for the next 21 days. If we did that on the federal level, on the state level, on the municipal level, on the city level, on every level of government, right, the various echelons, the various tiers, if everybody did it consistently and across the board, guess what? COVID would go away, all right? It would go away. And we know that because that's what happened in China. Now, why was China able to respond in the way that they were able to respond in such a concerted and coercive and efficient and expedient and effectual way, whereas we were not? The difference between China and the United States is a very big one. All right, we have this thing called the Bill of Rights, we have this thing called the Constitution, and that ensures that we, the citizenry, we, the constituent members of this great republic, have certain rights that cannot be arbitrarily infringed upon. If you're a Chinese citizen, you have certain rights, but the government doesn't really take those rights seriously enough to guarantee that they're going to honor them at all times, especially in times of national emergency. Right now, that's an example. Okay, so if you're a government that needs to get shit done, to put it quite blatantly and bluntly, right, then you better be an autocracy, right? Because a democracy, a republic such as we have, checks and balances, restraints on power, constitutional restrictions. Democracy impedes the capacity of the executive to respond in a truly imperial manner. He can't be an imperial president, right? People are always talking about Donald Trump becoming more of an imperial president. He's aggregating more powers into himself. Well, I think he would like to do that, right? But there are things that constrain his ability to do that, right? So he can't do that. He can't do that. I mean, I guess theoretically, hypothetically, anything's possible, but in theory, in constitutional theory, you can't do that, right? So that answers that question. I don't think I have anything else. I don't think there's a postscript to any of this. I would just say this: if at the end of this very thorough discussion of the content on the study guide, you still have lingering questions that are still outstanding and haven't been satisfactorily addressed to your own personal satisfaction, I strongly recommend that you call me. Right? You can email me, right? But chances are I'll probably be more inclined to respond in a more serious and concerted way if you call me as opposed to if you email me. Whatever you do, don't text me because you guys know I don't think I have it on me, but you guys know I have a flip phone and it takes me forever to actually punch out a text because it's just a very tedious process because I have well, you guys know what a flip phone is, for God's sakes. I'm very good at actually texting on that thing, but still, despite my aptitude for using the code on there, it still takes a long time and it's very laborious, and I'd rather not have to do that. And having to text the response to an essay type question or the interview questions I'm going to be asking you would actually take a very, very long time. It would be entirely too cumbersome. It wouldn't be worth my while, nor yours, to wait for a response. So if you really have questions that are lingering, and again, this is an opportunity not just to ask questions of me for clarification, it gives me an opportunity to really expound and elaborate to you because I can do that better verbally than I can do it in terms of typing. But it's also an opportunity to get you better acquainted with me personally. Okay, if you're apprehensive, if there's a great deal of anxiety and trepidation that's causing you to be concerned about the prospect of going in there on Tuesday, for God's sakes, first of all, it's only 12 minutes, guys. All right, 12 minutes. All right, and yeah, I mean, I guess you're kind of going to be on the spot, but I'll help you out. I promise you, I will. Okay, I'll be as nice as I possibly can because I realize some of you really don't want to have to go through with this, and you're only doing this to appease me and your fellow students, right? I understand it, and I know exactly who you are. Right? So I'm going to go real easy on those people, okay? Because there's a couple of you that already told me, I'm not sure about this whole thing, right? But suffice it to say, you guys should know, all right? And this is just, I don't know if this is going to make you feel any better, but it's a consolation prize of sorts. You guys should know at the end of the day that if you were taking this class with the full-time tenure track professor who actually teaches this, I guarantee you that person would very much insist upon a much higher degree of participation that I have insisted upon. And they would be calling you guys out on a pretty regular basis, all right? Now, I haven't called on anybody yet in this class. I mean, I asked people to volunteer, and I call on you when you volunteer, but I haven't called anybody out, right? Maybe I got to start doing that to get you more accustomed to talking. But I guarantee, if you take this political science class with the full-time tenure track person, and again with anybody else, honestly, not just with that person, but with anybody else, most of them are going to teach it in a manner that co-opts the Socratic method much more substantially than I rely upon. All right, so you can end up having to do a hell of a lot more talking if you were to take it with the other person than with me, or for any other person for that matter. Right, so you can thank me for the fact that you haven't really had to get up and say anything yet. Right, and maybe that's a bad thing because had I done that, maybe you'd be more acclimated to the process of actually talking. But you're only have to talk to me. There's only going to be me and you in there, so don't be concerned, right? All right. I think that's it, guys. I'm gonna try to end this video, and actually, I brought the mouse over here, and I got a wireless mouse, so hopefully I can end this here. If you got any questions, any concerns, any follow-up, like I said, hit me up. If you absolutely must email me, but I prefer a call, or email me and say, hey, Jeff, what's a good time to call you, and we'll go from there. All right, thanks a lot for listening. I hope this is helpful. Thumbs up, guys. Thumbs up on my YouTube video, all right? It's the least you can do for me. For putting this together at the last minute. Come on, guys. It's the night. I just heard about this cancellation of class just an hour ago. All right, have a great night. Be safe, guys. Wear your masks out there. Take care. Bye.